down the hatches. Hang on tight, Sunset Strip unveils right here. Alongside me, my brand new co-host for this brand new show, Jenna Leigh from Jenna Leighs Beauty Slam on YouTube. Welcome, my friend. Thank you for conjuring up this idea of a show, and it's great to have you here. Real quick, before we get down to the brass tacks, let everyone know what this show is and why we're here. Where can everyone catch your channel and all the goodness? And thanks for being here.
Thank you. People can find me on YouTube at Jenna Leighs Beauty Slam, the internet's girl next door, and your place for lipstick and chick kicks. You can also find me on Twitter at Miss Jenna _ Leigh. And you can also find me on Instagram at Jenna's Beauty Slam. It's brand new. I have another account, but this is a brand new wrestling themed and music themed account. So I'm sure you already follow me because of course you do, because I'm a superstar. So come check out the new Instagram as well. So yeah, that's that.
That's that. And as always, on Twitter at the HibickiTMD, catch me. Hit that subscribe right down below. Hit that subscribe to Jenna's channel as well. If you're into retro gaming, pro wrestling, all the nerdy goddamn goodness, find it right there on my channel. Too many shows to name. This is another one you can add to the list. It's up to like 235 now, I feel like. But yeah, this show, and I feel like, Jenna, before we start, some of the best things in life always come about or always unintentional. This show is about our love for 80s glam metal and the whole scene and yada, yada, yada. But we never knew that when we first met each other. It kind of came up randomly. And I think it was one of us saying it as a joke. And it was like, wait, I actually do really like it. And it's like, really? Because I don't meet many people that actually, yeah, like, I get it. Like, some of the music videos from the time are so bad they're good comedy and ha-ha. But I'm actually into 80s glam metal. Like, I fucking like it. And people make fun of me and come at me. I don't give a shit. It's great. I really wish I grew up at an older age in that era. I was really young, which sucks, but, you know, it is what it is. But, yeah, you're the same way, Jenna, and it was so refreshing to actually meet a fan, like, we're around the same age. But, yeah, I thought that was awesome. That's exactly why we're here, Sunset Strip, our look, a retrospective look at where all this stuff came from, the golden age, you could say. The Strip, man. You're talking about the Roxy, the whiskey. You're talking about them all, Jenna.
Absolutely. And I'm one of those people, and like I've told you before, when I love something, I have a tendency to want to know every single teeny tiny minute detail about it. And so in falling in love with hair metal, in falling in love with particularly like the band Mötley Crüe, of course, which is who we're going to discuss today, you go looking into the history of the Sunset Strip itself, and you realize that in addition to just the scene itself that it has fostered, that there's just an entire lifestyle that surrounds it. There's a group of just a few brothers who actually have bought and resold and owned the Roxy, the Troubadour, the Whiskey A Go Go, the Rainbow Bar and Grill. There's a bar that we're going to be talking about later on in this series called Gazzaro's, which launched more careers than I think anybody realizes. But what's crazy about the Sunset Strip, and you're not going to hear this about New York, you're not going to hear this about New Orleans or Miami or Las Vegas. Only on the Sunset Strip do you hear that the Doors and the Rolling Stones played the exact same bars in 1967 and 68 that Mötley Crüe and Rat and Autograph were playing in 1981, that Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco and My Chemical Romance played in like 2005. It's the exact same clubs, and that says something for longevity, and it says something for their ability to foster, create, and cultivate a scene and a movement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and obviously when we get to like the Fall Out Boy era, it being a scene into like this corporate cash cow, it wasn't really a scene anymore as like the Morrison Doors era and the glam era. You know what I mean? And to the grandaddies, that start. Well, before we get to that, real quick, one thing I do want to say is, as far as that scene, right? The scene in general was Guns N' Roses, the band. That was like every fucking apartment on the Strip down by the beach, pretty much. That's how these guys were living. That was them. and it just became manufactured, and you later see guys like Axl Rose morph into just this fucking putz by the end of it, and just to see what the corporate world does to somebody. But I feel like punk rock, right? When you immediately hear that genre, at least for me, and I feel like a lot of other people, and Jenna, maybe you, when you hear punk rock, before the music, I always think lifestyle first, and I feel like Guns N' Roses and glam gets a bad rap. You don't think lifestyle first. You think like, oh, corporate cock rock and huge arenas. No, it really was them. It's just like Hollywood caught on, just the nation caught on to just this little tiny, let's say, a drugged out fucking metal scene, and it exploded. Because it's always cool to be the bad guy.
Yeah, well, Nikki Sixx was like an established figure kind of in that scene, because another club that was huge was the Starwood, not quite on the Sunset Strip, but it was walking distance away. You could literally walk 2 blocks and you're there. Nikki was a bouncer and a kind of like a setup guy at the Starwood, and that he worked at a liquor store that was on the Strip. And so he became well known, and Mötley Crüe lived in like an apartment that backed up to the Troubadour. And so when you're that close to it, you are part of the scene, and the scene itself, like you said, it did become this corporate cock rock, arena rock shill. But like Tommy Lee said, it was him, Vince, and Nikki living in a filthy apartment, and literally it was so disgusting that if you made a sandwich, you had to hold on to it or the roaches were going to get it. It was that filthy. And Axl and Slash, they came around a couple of years later, but they were living the same way. They didn't sign straight to record labels and live the highfalutin private jet lifestyle. These guys were grungy, dirty, from the gutter, and it's like you mentioned, punk rock.
Yeah.
Particularly Guns N' Roses and Mötley Crüe both admit that their earliest influences were like the Sex Pistols and the New York Dolls. They just wanted to have a more polished sound than the punk rock
and the
sound.
More corporate something gets, it always evolves into what I think is something for the worse. And just like with punk rock, you went from that dirty you went from the Ramones, the Blink-182. With cock rock, you went from Guns N' Roses and Motley to, and I know we both like them, but to Nelson and to shit like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just this total
Trickster and Steelheart and
easy
and bands
don't say Trickster. I don't want to fight you already into the show. I love Trickster. No, I know, I'm kidding. But yeah, I agree.
Trickster was the band that solidified our
it really is.
scene. You know that I love Trickster.
It was our mega power.
Trickster was the band that we had that moment. Yeah.
But yeah, what I was going to say though before we got to like, the lifestyle stuff about it was the two grandaddies, in my opinion, that really put the scene of the Strip on the map again was Quiet Riot just as much as Mötley Crüe, and we'll get to them in another episode. But those two bands right there, Come On Feel the Noise was a fucking sensation in America when that song dropped, and nobody saw it coming. Labels were rejecting these bands left and right before that song hit, I feel like.
Yeah, and the band themselves didn't want to record it because it's a cover, of course, of was it Slade?
It was just a total
originally.
The whole thing was.
But yeah, it was a cover of a song, and Metal Health, their album, shot up the chart. No one saw it coming. Actually, Quiet Riot will be our second episode, so they'll be next. So. But
yeah,
yes,
I only bring them up because I feel like you can't talk about one without the
81
other.
or 82.
The launch.
No, you can't. That's true. Are cultivating, and they wanted to be superstars. And what was funny was the very first time they sold out the whiskey, Nikki called his grandparents. It was like, dude, we made it. We sold out the whiskey. And his grandmother said, nobody knows who you are. And it was just such a kick in the stomach to Nikki Sixx, because in his mind, we sold out the Roxy, or, the whiskey. We made it. That's it. And it just goes to kind of show you how encapsulated that little scene was, and how standalone that scene was, and how important it was to the people in it. But yeah, You had them on one side who were just trying to push every boundary and push the envelope in every imaginable way, whether it was appearance, whether it was sound, whether it was stage setup, whether it was theatrics on stage. You know, they took a lot from punk rock, you know, like the Plasmatics, like Wendy O. They, in their earliest, during their Too Fast for Love stage show, they actually had a mannequin made to look like Wendy O, and they would cut it in half with a chainsaw, almost like an homage to how Wendy O would, you know, cut a guitar in half with a chainsaw.
Didn't they cover a Plasmatic song on some? It was like a box set release with unreleased demos. I feel like I've heard them cover.
Butcher Babies.
There you go. That's why I asked you to do the show with me. Right there's an example.
Yeah, they did Butcher Babies. Like Nikki in particular was a huge fan. And toward the end of the Plasmatics run, they kind of switched out a guitarist here, a guitarist there, a drummer here, a drummer there. But there was a drummer at some point, and I cannot name it, so don't hold me to this, but there was a drummer at some point who played with the Plasmatics, who also worked a little bit of session time with Mötley Crüe, and there was a connection there as well. So, yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, let's get right down to it, man. Why we're here. Tommy, Nikki, Mick, Vince, man. The crew. The fucking crew, man. Girls, girls, girls. Shout at the goddamn devil. When I saw that video as a kid, that's everything I wanted to be in that moment. It was like, you hear like, maybe our, you know, people we would think parents for us, our age. For them, it was Kiss. For me, it was when I saw that video as a kid. That was like my Kiss, in a way, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. The first video of Mötley Crüe that I remember seeing vividly was Home Sweet Home, actually. There's that spot in the very beginning when the piano is playing, Tommy Lee's playing the piano, and there's a shot of Vince backstage, and he's like walking down like a section backstage where he has a whole bunch of like porn posters up, and he's literally like kissing his hand, and he's touching it to each model like, well, thank you, honey, right before he goes out on stage. And for some reason, I remember that of all things.
Let's say, and that's great, by the way. Let's say one thing about the crew that you can't say about a lot of bands from that era. All four of these guys pretty solid musically, pretty good at what they did. They weren't Poison, you know. I feel like Tommy especially. Right. My God, well, unbelievably underrated.
Yeah, Tommy was a beast.
He really is underrated, but really good. Just good stuff, man. And there's the first album. Let's get right down to it, Jenna. What are your thoughts? Is that your favorite? And let's just flat out say, what is your favorite Mötley Crüe album? And then we'll springboard in their first album. Your thoughts on it real quick.
My favorite album overall by Mötley Crüe is Dr. Feelgood, but I also really like Theater of Pain, and maybe we'll talk about this another time, but Saints of Los Angeles was a fantastic album for the end of the road for them. But Too Fast for Love was great, and it's only been in the last few years, actually going back and listening to it, that I've really grown to appreciate it. When you listen to that, especially like for people who grew up in the 80s and some of their first exposure to Mötley Crüe was Without You, Don't Go Away, Mad, Kickstart My Heart. You go back and you listen to Livewire, Toast of the Town, Terror in Tinseltown, and you're going, these are not the same band. They really did evolve from a loud, fast, crude punk rock band to a more polished band down the line. But yeah, Dr. Feelgood is probably my favorite just because it's the most put together. They were sober and just lean, mean, and killing it during the recording. They also enlisted Bob Rock as their producer for Dr. Feelgood. And the sobriety, the fact that everyone was 100% on the ball, ready to go, killing the game, you know, everything shows. And that is why it was such a sonically cohesive, ass-kicking record.
And of course, that was always, that was the stamp of your king shit now when you had Bob Rock producing you for so many bands back then.
Yes.
But for me, it was always personally, for me is when they were just like you said, there's fast as hell. Just that crew, just the Genesis of crew is always my personal favorite. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
They're so raunchy and just in your face about it, and it's a combination of that, and it's sexual, and it's badass, and it's just so much to describe at once. But I'm gonna stop fanboying over it, so you can make it sound a little more professional about it. The crew, what was it really when they got noticed? You would say that moment, playing the gigs on the strip when it all clicked for the guys.
Well, Mötley Crüe, according to the guys themselves, all say that January 17th, 1981 is the official date that they formed Mötley Crüe with the name and started actually booking legitimate shows together and not just dicking around in their backyard, basically. Originally, Nikki had kicked around the idea of calling the band Christmas. The guys, of course, shot that down.
Oof.
Mick, a while back when traveling with another band, remembered somebody coming in and saying, "Man, what a motley looking crew." And he had actually jotted that down in a notebook. Now, he had spelled it Mottleykru. He happened to mention that to Nikki. Nikki fell in love with it. They altered the spelling to the spelling that we all know it for today. And because they were all drinking that Lowenbrau beer, they decided to put the umlaut, of course. Yeah, the umlauts, which led to a really, really funny moment the first time they played in Germany, because the crowd started chanting, "Mötley Crüe, Mötley Crüe." And they were like, "Why are they saying it like that, dude? Why are they mispronouncing it?" And I was like, "The umlauts, dude." They were actually correctly using the umlauts. And the band said, "Oh shit, we didn't know they did anything." It just goes to show,
How would you say
yeah.
Motorhead then? There's like a lot of umlauts in Motorhead, isn't there?
I don't know. Lenny can't even remember all the words to his own songs. He probably doesn't know.
That's true.
God rest his soul. But their first shows were, of course, at the Starwood, where Nikki was really well known because his previous band with Lizzie Gray, London, had played a lot of shows there. And actually, if you look at Too Fast for Love, there's at least one or two songs that are actually co-written by Nikki Sixx and Lizzie Gray. That I think Toast of the Town, and there was one other song that Lizzie Gray has a songwriting credit on, which is kind of cool, just the overlap between that era of kind of Nikki Sixx's career before he was full-fledged Mötley Crüe bassist. But their first show that was like a full-on sellout show that a crowd was there to see the crew was later on in April of 1981. It was a show at the Troubadour that was followed up with a huge party at the Rainbow Bar and Grill, which was just like the notorious hangout for all rock stars. But that was the first time that they did a lot of their tricks on stage. That was when they first did the nod to Wendy Williams with the chainsaw. It was also the first time that before a big, huge group of people, they did the stunt where they lit Nikki on fire. They ended up getting their manager at the time charged several $1,000s in fines, which did not end well. But by the end of 1982, they had been playing that set pretty repetitively. And toward the end of 1982 was when they got signed to their first, they called it their first international tour, which was a tour in Canada.
Oh my.
And it was called Cruising Through Canada in 82.
I see what they did there.
And basically, it was basically the tour of publicity stunts. They got arrested for their spiky stage wardrobe in Edmonton International Airport. They were accused of carrying dangerous weapons. And later on, Vince got arrested with a suitcase. It's like a carry-on suitcase full of porn magazines. That was a PR stunt, of course. And when they were playing, I don't want to say the Edmonton Arena, but it was a large arena there. I don't know if there is an Edmonton Arena. But a bomb threat was made in their very last night playing in Canada. And of course, that made the front page of the Edmonton Journal, which they called their very first international press.
It was probably their
After
fucking
that-
manager on a payphone outside trying to get him for fucking press. Just calling it in.
Basically. But at the time, there was a man named Alan Kaufman managing them, and he had about as much experience managing metal bands as you and I do. And he ended up, just to meet the demands the band was making for stage attire and setups and travel and rental cars they were destroying, he mortgaged his house 3 times over and just dug himself a fantastically deep hole. And in the beginning of 1983, they fired him, and that was when they hired Doug Thaler and Doc McGee, the guys who would go on to be their managers through the 80s.
The legend himself, Doc McGee.
Yeah. Basically, like right after that, that was early 1983, and right around this time, MTV was really starting to pick up steam, and it wasn't just, it wasn't just Michael Jackson videos anymore, and they were starting to reach out a little more.
I feel like this is going to end up being on every episode of this series, Jenna. Like the cut to a little clip, something. The MTV factor is what happened. Let's say it. That's how these bands got nationwide exposure like that in an instant and made them blow up so fast.
Absolutely.
So bookmark number 1, Mötley Crüe, MTV. Here we go.
Yes. And because of that, an artist by the name of Ozzy Osbourne fell in love with them. They ended up getting a spot on the U.S. festival, and that combined with the exposure of MTV, they ended up as the opening act for the Ozzy Osbourne 1984 World Tour.
I love how it's just like some guy by the name of Ozzy Osbourne. No, it's like if Ozzy validates you, you fucking made it.
Right. It was like some guy named Ozzy.
Could you imagine?
Cool.
Let's put ourselves in those guys' shoes, the Crüe shoes, for a second, Jenna. Just that second in time, like you gone from your grandmother saying those things to you and crushing your soul to fucking Ozzy requesting you.
Exactly.
Wow, just like that.
And the time lapse between that selling out of the Roxy and the Troubadour and him making that call that we made it was about a year.
And I can't imagine all the critics that gave those guys shit over the years about, we'll just stop doing it. I can't imagine how that was hard fucking. I couldn't imagine how their addictions got any harder to control. You know what I mean? Gee, I wonder how.
Absolutely.
Like, my God. Ugh.
Absolutely.
And it's just everything in the blink of an eye.
Let me backtrack just a tiny bit, actually, because in May of 1982 was when they got their first record deal. They signed a 7-year deal with Elektra Records, and they signed with Elektra, according to Nikki, because, well, that's who Queen signed with, so that's who we're going to sign with. Yep. That was the thought put before it.
Hey, it's a good name.
Also, in between the U.S. festival and in between the 1984 Ozzy Osbourne opening act, they actually got invited to open up for Kiss on the Creatures of the Night tour. However, after 5 shows, they were kicked off by Gene Simmons himself for, quote, bad behavior.
Ooh, he put a dunce cap in all 4
Gene
of them.
Simmons is a bitch. Yeah, Gene Simmons, Mr. sticks his tongue out and spits blood and wears stuff that kind of looks like stuff I wore in my stripper days, and he wants to pass judgment. I've always found that amusing.
It's all about egos with Simmons. They were younger. They were a decade younger than him. They were what's hot. Kiss was becoming, but Christ,
stale.
This is what, 85, 86?
This is 83. But even still.
Still, yeah, exactly. What are they hot off the heels of The Elder?
Released the disco album, and we're trying to gain back.
Yeah.
Some,
all that momentum from the release of that shitty album, The Elder, that was terrible. And I know some people like it.
Yes.
Why? It was awful. It was like this medieval, weird Paul Stanley shit that I don't get to this day. Like, ugh. But
right. But the year 1983 was a very, pivotal year for Mötley Crüe because, yes, in May of 82, they signed their deal with Elektra. The summer of 82 was, of course, the Cruising Through Canada tour. Halloween of 82 was when Nikki Sixx did his, as I called it, the Light My Fire trick, which got them fined for lighting him on fire. But yes, March 83 was the 5 dates on the Kiss tour. They get kicked off for bad behavior. Summer of 1983 was when Nikki first got in a car accident, wrecking his friend's Porsche, injuring his shoulder badly enough that he was prescribed Percocet. Here we go.
Yeah.
That's what I wrote in my notes. Nikki was given Percocet for the first time. ... Here we go.
Off to the races.
Fall of 1983 was when Shout at the Devil was first released, and it actually sold 200,000 copies in its first 2 weeks. It reached number 17 on the Billboard chart. Their first MTV appearance was promoting this album. They also followed it up with a 23-city tour. This led right into the opening act for Ozzy Osbourne. January 1984, Shout at the Devil went gold, platinum the very next day. Coincidentally, while celebrating at the Rainbow Bar and Grill, they run into none other than the Brat Pack's Demi Moore, who in 1984 was riding pretty high too, as far as like the St. Elmo's fire, and the Brat Pack was everything in Hollywood. She corners Nikki Sixx and suggests AA to him. How do you think that went?
Probably not well.
Exactly. Yeah. You think he listened at 84? Yeah. The bulk of 1984 was spent opening for Ozzy Osbourne, and then they followed that up with a huge European tour where the Mötley Crüe MO was really established. They were trashing hotel rooms, running through groupies. They basically were establishing the mold for not only really Mötley Crüe behavior, but the 80s glam metal, glam rock, bad boy behavior, as it were.
Is it time for, what was it, a baby shark or something? Is it time for that story? Or what kind of sea urchin was it that they had on a groupie that I've seen Doc McGee tell in an interview? I think it was like a baby shark, right?
I was actually going to tell the telephone story. Have you heard that?
No, so do it. I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but I want to hear it.
Okay. No, you're good. Like, I know the story you're talking about, but I don't know the specifics of it, like off the top of my head.
Maybe it's best that the listeners let their minds wander with just Baby Shark. We'll leave it at that. But yes,
leave it at that. But the telephone story. It was after a show, and there was a conference room at this hotel that for some reason had a bunch of leather couches and a pool table. So that's naturally where the crew and their groupies migrated. At some point, it devolved into a crew of groupies, all bottomless, around the pool table. And the guys just went one by one through each of them. And that happened. Well, eventually, some girls were too high. Some girls dipped out. Some girls were mad that they weren't getting their specific guy to themselves. Vince, being Vince, grabbed the only blondes and left at one point. And so Mick, of course, does not participate in such things. He was in his room. And as the night goes on, they run out of Coke. They run out of this, that, and the other. And it's Tommy, Nikki, and one single solitary groupie who has just hung on through everything. And she's sprawled out on the pool table, and they're literally like digging through their suitcase looking for things to penetrate her with. They used the pool cue. They used their toothbrushes. Barf. Eventually, they used beer cans. They used beer bottles. Finally, they decided that they would use a telephone receiver. And you remember the old 80s rotary phones, the big, gigantic phone receiver?
Yes.
But as they go to insert this in her, Nikki decides, well, let's not just do that. Let's call somebody
Let's call
from
somebody. Why not? Fuck it. When in Rome or in a crevice.
Right. And he says for her credit, she actually moaned and acted like she enjoyed it, but it was like, come on, chick. There's no way that's pleasant. But anyway.
Who did he call? Is the question.
Vince. They call Vince.
Oh, okay.
Vince doesn't answer, so they call Doc McGee. And, you know, at this point it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and Doc is trying to sleep. And Nikki says, I can literally, inside this girl, hear him yelling because the earpiece is inside the girl. He's like, and I hear, hello? Fucking hello? And Nikki's like, hey, you're in a stripper pussy, bro. And then Tommy apparently just pulls it out and slams the phone down, and there's the groupie telephone story. I'd like to meet that chick. I don't want to like touch her or anything, but I'd like to meet her.
What a bunch of rascals. What a bunch of scallywags, a bunch of knuckleheads. My God. You know, and I'm probably totally wrong. I don't have a picture of Doc McGee up in front of me, and I know our viewers have been looking at it because I throw up pictures or whatever. I feel like he looks like Kevin from The Office, in a way.
Right? It's just like that face, like after Kevin dropped his chili. Just oh, come on.
When he spilled
his chili. On.
Oh, God.
Yeah, when he spilled his chili, just oh, come on.
Kind of face. Together here. Let me get it together here.
Not too long after this is when they got the first of a lot of hardcore reality chicks, because December 8th, 1984, Vince Neil was throwing a beach party, a huge 3-day all-weekend barbecue. Everyone was there. Nikki was there with some girl. Tommy was there with a girl. Mick was there. The guys from Hanoi Rocks were in town because they were getting ready to go on the road. Well, come Sunday night, they realized, shit, we're out of beer. So Vince and Nicholas Dingley, known as Razzle to everyone, climb into Vince's Ford Pantera and head to the liquor store. Unfortunately, they were going on 3 days of no sleep, nonstop coke, nonstop alcohol. And on the way back, Vince was doing 65 and a 35, hit a puddle, lost control, and hit another vehicle head on. Razzle died instantly.
And it was huge. It was a big blow. It was awful for Vince Neil. And you know what? It didn't slow any of them down, and that's how much the scene had a grip on them, and the demons. You know, it didn't stop any of them from still partying and stuff. It stopped Vince for a little bit.
To tell you how removed from reality they had already become, when sitting in the courtroom, the judge is telling Vince Neil the minimum time he could serve. And Vince, without a second thought, turns to his lawyer and says, well, I can't go to jail. I've got to go on tour, man. And the lawyer just looks at him and goes, don't you understand? None of that matters to these people. You killed someone, man. You killed someone. You damn near killed 3 people. And it was just not getting through to them. They had grown so accustomed to getting what they wanted and doing whatever they wanted and not answering to anybody, that this massive hit of reality, it was almost like they were watching it in third person. It was almost like they knew what was happening, but they were still so out of it all the time that they weren't sober enough to really absorb it.
Yeah.
Perfect example, the night of the wreck that killed Razzle, you know, after 30 or 40 minutes, when the guys realized that Vince and Razzle hadn't come back, Tommy and Nikki jump in a car with a couple of their buddies, head down the road, and it doesn't take long before they come up on the wreck and they see Vince sitting in basically Indian style on the curb, rocking back and forth. And Tommy said all he saw was one of Razzle's shoes in the middle of the road, and there was blood everywhere, and they knew. So they turned around and went back. And it wasn't until they got back. Now, bear in mind, Vince left with Razzle to go get alcohol. They go get the alcohol. They're coming back. They get in the wreck. Nikki and Tommy take X amount of time. And you know, when you've been up for 3 days, who knows how long it actually was before they realized, wait, they're not back yet. Well, when they get back, the sun's coming up. And Mick Mars is on the beach, covered in sand all in his eyes, ears, nose, hair, face down. And he sits up. And they're like, brother, what are you doing? He's like, I tried to kill myself last night. I guess the ocean didn't want me.
Jeez.
That was where they were in 1984. Just every single one of them. It was such a weird analogy for where they were. They were on top of the world, but every single one of them mentally was falling apart just a little bit. You
But
know?
the crew would rise again. They would see success. Believe it. A lot of people think, oh, that was the end. No. For anyone that didn't know, yeah, they would bounce back, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like, Jenna, because we've already almost reached our allotted time, the crew, out of any of the bands on this, is definitely worthy of a part 2, I feel like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If nothing else, because if you want to cut off here, this is a great place to cut off, because we can pick up with January 1985 for part 2.
So, guys, stick around. Part 2 is going to drop. That was part 1 on the debut of this Sunset Stripped, the most makeup-filled metal show around. My God, a combination, 2 worlds come together. Thank you again, Jenna, so much for starting this show with me. I love talking about this stuff. Once again,
Me too.
Where can everyone catch you? All the goodness before we're back for part 2.
Everyone can find me on YouTube. I am Jenna Leighs Beauty Slam. I am the internet's girl next door and the home of lipstick and chick kicks. Follow me on Twitter at Miss Jenna_Leigh, on Instagram at Jenna's Beauty Slam, and Miss_Jenna_Leigh. And you can always hang out with me on Snapchat. I'm Cute Cat Lady. Hang out with me for that's basically where I do like little mini daily vlogs. I'm boring, but I make the best of it. Hang out with me. And that's that.
And like we said, I know this episode kind of ended on a little doom and gloom, but the crew will have their day in the sun again. Have no fear. And so will we. And as always, follow me on Twitter at @TheHibickyTMD. HibickyTMD on YouTube, Retro Gaming, Pro Wrestling, Slam Pigs Podcast, The Reset Button, Union Smack, Never Drew a Dime, a Bicky Pro, a Bicky Live, a Bicky High Spots, a Bicky Quickie, all kinds of goodness. Until next time, this has been, with myself and Jenna Leigh, Sunset Stripped.